This is the video that goes through Module 1 PowerPoint presentation for CIT 1122. Uh, Basic device configuration. Let's take a look at the next slide, and it'll show us all of the sections of this particular chapter. Configuring a switch with initial settings, configure switch ports, secure remote access, basic router configuration, directly verifying directly connected networks. We'll go through each one of these. Some of these are better served with the instructional videos for the packet tracers. So there are a whole bunch of videos that are posted for that, and I'll refer you to those as this goes along. And we will have instructional videos for all of the packet tracers in this class. So just keep that in mind. First part, 1.1, configuring a switch with initial settings. This just gets into the idea that a switch is just basically a computer with a simple job of forwarding traffic by reading the frame header of Ethernet protocol data units that are moving from one place to another. And it's just like a regular machine with a processor and memory and long-term storage. And in this case, this slide gets into the idea that, it's got to boot up just like a computer boots up, and it's going to check that memory, make sure it's there, make sure the processor is functioning correctly, and then it's going to look towards the long-term storage location, which on a switch is called flash. So you can see there's this boot system flash, and it's listed here, and it just shows the name of the operating system. And once the operating system is loaded, the switch is going to look for a config file. So if there's no config, it'll just boot normally and regularly. I've got a packet tracer that's open, and if we just took a quick look at switch 0 and we just look at the CLI, this is kind of what a switch is going to look like when it loads with no config. You can do a show run, and it'll give you all the attributes of the switch. All the ports are listed there and the lines that you could configure. And really nothing's configured, and that is what you're going to get as far as the initial running config of the device. But if we wanted to make changes to the switch and then have those changes be saved, we actually have to save those changes with a copy command. So I'm just going to go in and we'll just make a quick change. So we'll just do config t, and we'll just change the host name to SW1. And now the switch's name is SW1. That's great. If I was to restart the switch right now, that host name change would disappear. We're not going to do that. But in order to make it stay, we're just going to do copy run start. And copy run start is going to change that startup config. So at this point, if I reload it, and it comes back up, you'll see that that host name has been saved. Without adding that copy run start command, that's not going to happen. And that's kind of the main thing that they're getting into in that particular slide of the presentation. So, hey, there is an operating system. It's stored in Flash. There's also a config file. It's called config.txt. And the startup config file is going to keep track of all your changes as long as you remember to go ahead and copy and save it. So copy run start is the key to that. The next slide gets into the idea that the front of the switch does have a series of functional lights that'll help you understand how the device is working. So you can see each one of the lights there. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but they're pretty self-explanatory as far as what they do. There's also a button at the bottom there called mode, and the mode button can be used to recover from a crashed system. And it can also be used if you don't know the password. And if you can't remember how to reset a switch, there is another place that I can point you to, which is in Blackboard. I do have a document, a line in course materials that says how to reset the password on a switch. And you can just walk through those steps anytime you need that. We're not going to cover that in this particular presentation, but just know that that is available on course materials. And then this slide is a nice indicator of, hey, there's these cool lights on the front. Sometimes they're green, and sometimes they're blinking, and sometimes they're amber colored. What do these things mean? And then this is a nice chart to give you an idea of, if you see, a particular stat light and it happens to be blinking green, what does that mean? Well, that's set for activity, right? So, but if it's amber, well, then if it's blinking amber, then the port is blocked to prevent looping. So this is a nice little chart. You can memorize this if you want to. A lot of this stuff is self-explanatory, and you should have learned it in 1121, TBH. This slide just gets into the system crash that we had talked about before. One of the things I did fail to mention that I should have probably said is that if you're looking for a power switch on the switch itself, there isn't one. There's no power on, power off button on Cisco switches. They're just meant to be powered up all the time. So if you need to unpower one or to take to restart it, you can use the reload command, or you can pull the cable that goes to the power. So you can pull the power cable. That's it. There's no button. And that's all they're getting into here. And we talked about what to do if you have the password reset already. So that's a thing. Let's take a look at the next slide. The next slide gets into the idea of switch management. And there's a couple different ways you can manage a switch. You guys should be aware of that. Packet Tracer gives you an additional way where you can just click on the switch and then just go to the CLI tab and you can run it from there. But if I was going to manage a switch, I have the opportunity to get to the CLI either through a console cable, if I have direct access to the device, or I can do it through the TCP/IP ports that are in the front of the switch. So I'm just going to kind of pop down into Packet Tracer again. And if we were to take a quick look at Packet Tracer, like I said, one way you can get into it is you can get to it through just opening it up and hitting the CLI tab. That's a really fast, easy way, and that's kind of cheating a little bit. But if I was going to go through a PC, I've got two options. And one of the options to manage the switch is with the console cable. So I can just grab my console cable here for my PC. And consoles use a technology that's known as RS-232. So I'm going to go ahead and select my RS-232 port. And I'm going to click on my switch, and I'm going to plug it into the console. If you take a console cable and you plug it into anything other than those two things, it absolutely will not work. So keep that in mind. It's a little bit easier in real life when you get into that. But when we go to the desktop, you're going to have to use, with a console cable, what's called a RS-232 Hyper Terminal Emulation Simulator, or Hyper Terminal Emulation Application. So what we've got there is terminal configuration, and I've set it up here. There's some basic settings, which are defaulted to what you need for a Cisco device. Just choose OK, and you can access the command line of the switch through the console. Like I said, in real life, you'll just do this if you have direct access to it. But if you don't have direct access to the switch, you're going to need to access it remotely. And the way that you can access the switch remotely is by setting up Telnet or SSH. And there's a whole video on setting up SSH. It's one of the first videos that's posted with Packet Tracer. But a couple of things that do need to happen in order to just gain access to the switch are as follows. So the switch itself will have to have the VTY lines set up. Another thing that has to happen is the switch will need a privileged level password, privileged mode password, in order to allow you to log in remotely. So one of the first things you would need if you're going to remotely access the switch is set up the enable secret. I'm going to keep it really secure and just call it Cisco. The second thing we're going to need to do is we need to set up the VTY lines so we can access the switch. So line VTY. 0 to 4. You could do 0 to 15, it doesn't really matter. And we'll do password, and we'll make that Cisco also, and we'll use keyword login. And now we're set. That is set up. Now the next thing we have to do is, in order to access it remotely, we're going to access it through TCP/IP. And if we're going to access it through TCP/IP, it means that the switch would need to have an IP address in order for it to be able to read those packets that are coming to it. So we're going to go ahead and need to do that. So I'm just going to do a quick exit here. And the initial way that we teach you how to do this is we go, okay, well, the PC is on this particular network and the switch is on this particular network. And by default, all of the ports on the switch are in a default port group called VLAN1. And that's fine. And we'll just set this up that way right now. And then when we take a break and we do the next video, or when we do section 2 or 3, I forget which, we'll actually we'll change that, and we'll create a different VLAN, aka port group, and we'll switch things around there. So just to make it simple here, let's go ahead and set up an IP address. So we're going to do INT VLAN1 IP address. We'll just make this, oops, my number lock is not on, INT VLAN1. 192.168.10.20. We'll just make this 10.20 with a /24, and we're in business, and we'll do a no shut on that, and that interface comes up. So at this point, we should be able to telnet into the switch. So let's go ahead and do an exit here, and I'm going to go ahead and close this down, close that down, and let's go to our command prompt. Oh, before we do that, my bad. Let's put an IP address on the PC. Let's make this 192.168.10.11. It doesn't matter if we have a default gateway because there's no router, so we'll just go ahead and close that. And let's go ahead and see if we can't telnet into the switch. So 192.168.10.20. And it should be open. Doesn't look good here. Connection timed out. Remote host is not responding. Oh man, let's see. 192.168.10.20. Let's go ahead and ping that. And so there's some kind of problem here. Oh, yeah. Hey, take a look at that. The other thing that we have to have is we have to have a cable for TCP/IP to work. So let's go ahead and add that. And suddenly, I think that we're going to have a little bit more success telnetting in. So let's try that one more time. Hey, there it is. Password is Cisco. EN password Cisco again. And we're into the switch. So run. And we're all good. So that's a quick way that you can gain access into the switch. So we've done it both ways here. We have connected via the console cable, and then we also connected through TCP/IP. So that's pretty good. Let's go back into the PowerPoint presentation and see if there's anything we're missing here. I think that's pretty good. One of the things I didn't really mention is when you put an IP address on a switch, that is called an SVI, or a switch virtual interface. And the only reason they call it that is because it's an interface that can be accessed through any of the ports on the front of the switch. It's not associated with a specific interface. Like on a router, you have an interface and you put an IP address on that particular interface. In this case, this switch that we were just working with has 24, 26 ports. And any one of them can be accessible as long as they're in the same VLAN or port group, and more on that later. As the device that's trying to connect to it, if it's a local connection, it will respond. So it's a virtual interface that can be accessed through any of the physical interfaces on the front of the device. I hope that makes sense. Let's take a look at the next slide here. And this just shows how to configure it, which we've done already. That's not a big deal. And I think we're pretty much getting down. And the very last thing is doing some show commands. We also did not set up an IPv6 interface on the switch. You're on your own on that. And we'll get into a little bit more on switch interfaces in the next video.